My wife's family kept talking down about me, and now that my company is successful, they're all crawling back to me for money. Hello, and welcome back to Story Nest. Remember to subscribe. It's the easiest way to support us and stay updated on our stories. I remember the day we first sat down to talk about it, my wife and I. She had always been incredibly driven, with a work ethic that could match any CEO. Growing up, money had always been tight for her family, and while her grandpa had some money, her mom and sister didn't share the same financial stability. My wife, though, was different. She worked tirelessly to climb up from the bottom, and I respected that about her more than anything. When we met, I was working in trucking, making a decent living around $50,000 to $70,000 a year. I wasn't rich, but I was comfortable. But then came the idea, an idea I couldn't shake. I had an opportunity in a niche marketing field, one that I thought could change everything. Friends of mine, who had always been supportive of my work, encouraged me to start my own marketing business. The potential was there, but there was a catch. Starting a business from the ground up meant a lot of sacrifice. The first year would be rough, and there were no guarantees. I remember when I told my wife. She didn't even hesitate. She was on board immediately, no second thoughts. We discussed the hardships, the months where I might not get a paycheck or where the money would be tight. But she didn't flinch. She was all in. I had to keep reminding her that this was a long-term game. Some months I might get paid, other months I might not. And still, she supported me with everything she had. But I knew there were going to be people who didn't understand, and that's exactly what happened with her family. Her family didn't see what I was doing as hard work. To them, I wasn't working at all because I was working from home. They saw me at home, and they just assumed I wasn't doing anything, that I wasn't trying hard enough. They couldn't wrap their heads around the fact that a remote job, while untraditional, could still be legitimate. They started to criticize me. They called me lazy, a deadbeat. I was accused of not wanting to work, even though I was busting my ass building something from scratch. They ignored the fact that I was still driving a truck part-time to keep a steady income. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make sure we didn't fall behind. Every time they saw me at home, they'd call me out, asking why I wasn't out working a real job. And every time, my wife would defend me. She'd explain that I was building a business, that I was working just as hard, if not harder than anyone they knew. But it didn't matter. The narrative they had in their heads didn't shift, and I could see how frustrated she was with it. It hurt me, too. I couldn't believe how little they understood. It wasn't that I didn't care about them, it was that I was doing something that would ultimately help us both. But they just saw me as a man who was doing nothing. A year passed and things were tight. There were moments when I wondered if I'd made the right decision. The days when my bank account looked like a wasteland and the nights where the stress of making ends meet kept me awake were the hardest. But I couldn't give up. I couldn't go back to the life I had before, driving trucks and living paycheck to paycheck. Slowly, the pieces started falling into place. I learned the ins and outs of marketing, tweaking my strategies, improving my services, and growing my reputation. Business wasn't booming overnight, but it was steadily picking up. More clients, bigger projects, and soon enough, I was making more than I ever did in trucking. The thing was, I wasn't spending a ton either. We'd cut back when we first started the business. No luxuries, no extra expenses, and now it was paying off. We didn't need all the things we once thought were essential. It felt like a breakthrough, a real turning point. My income wasn't just matching what I'd been making in trucking, it was surpassing it. There was room to breathe now. I had the flexibility to control my schedule and my time. And while I still drove the semi occasionally for a friend, it wasn't to make ends meet anymore. It was more of a side gig to keep my CDL active, just in case. I thought about sharing my success with my wife's family. I really did. I had a lot of pride in what I'd built, and part of me wanted them to see that all the work, the sacrifice, had paid off. But I also knew that doing so could invite criticism. They had never been on my side, and I wasn't sure if they ever would be. Then, as if on cue, her family started to take notice. At first, they were subtle, dropping hints about how we could all go out to eat or get together for a day trip. But I quickly realized what they were really doing. They were testing the waters. They wanted to see if I'd be the one footing the bill. And, predictably, I was. They invited us out to dinners, suggested vacations, and when the check came, they'd look at me with those expectant eyes. They didn't even make an attempt to contribute, assuming I'd cover everything because things were going so well for me now. I had no problem going out with them or spending time together, but I wasn't about to pay for everyone's meals or vacations just because I had more money than I did before. I wasn't responsible for their financial choices or their lack of planning. I wasn't their personal ATM. But I didn't want to stir up conflict, so I just quietly paid my share and let them enjoy their day. After all, if it made them happy, what was the harm? But that's when things started to get tense. The situation with her family escalated quickly, and before long, I found myself in a position I didn't want to be in, feeling like the bad guy. It wasn't enough that I was paying my share for everything. They wanted more. They began to expect me to cover more of the expenses, assuming that since my business was doing well, I was suddenly their personal piggy bank. It all came to a head one evening after another dinner outing. This time, my wife and I had agreed that we would pay for our meals and maybe split a little bit of the total with her parents. But as usual, when the bill came, her family's expectations were clear. They wanted more. One of her cousins, in particular, looked at me and said, "So, what are you covering this time? Are you just going to pay for your own meal, or are you picking up the whole tab?" My wife shot him a look, but it didn't matter. It felt like every time I went out with them, it was the same thing. I wasn't doing enough, or I wasn't doing it the right way. They would go on and on about how they knew I was doing well now, and how it would be nice if I'd help out more. That's when I finally snapped. I realized I had to put my foot down. I turned to my wife and said, "I've never been shy about my money, but I'm not about to pay for everything just because they assume I'm rolling in it. I've worked hard for this, and I'm not going to let them take advantage of that." My wife didn't say anything, but I could tell she understood where I was coming from. I wasn't angry with her family, per se, but I was frustrated with how entitled they were acting. The real tipping point came when we went on a family vacation. They suggested a weekend getaway, and once again, I was expected to cover the cost of everything. At that point, I'd had enough. I was tired of being guilted into paying for their meals, their outings, their trips. I wasn't their bank, and I couldn't afford to keep pretending I was. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about respect. They hadn't supported me when I needed it the most. They hadn't believed in the business I was building, and now they expected me to bail them out just because I had made it? That didn't sit right with me. I had worked hard for what I had, and I wasn't about to let anyone make me feel guilty for it. The vacation was the last straw. It had all been building up to that moment, and by the time we returned, I was done. Her family's expectations had become so overwhelming that I felt like I couldn't breathe. I'd worked my butt off to get to this point, and now they expected me to hand out money as if it was nothing. It was time to set some boundaries. I sat down with my wife when we got home, feeling drained and frustrated. "I've been thinking," I started carefully. "I've supported you in everything. I've let you do what you want with your money, including helping your family out. But I've also been clear about what I'm comfortable with, and I need you to understand that I'm not okay with being expected to pay for everyone just because I'm doing well now." She listened, and I could tell she was torn. I wasn't attacking her, I was just laying out the facts. I told her how I felt about her family's behavior. How they had never supported me, how they had criticized my work when it was hard, and now they were treating me like a walking ATM. I needed her to understand that I wasn't just frustrated with the constant pressure to pay, but that it also came with the feeling of being unappreciated for the sacrifices I made to get where I was. "I get it," she said, finally breaking the silence. "They haven't been the most supportive. I can see that now, but it's just hard for me to balance being there for them and protecting you." I smiled, thankful for her understanding. "I just want to be clear about where I stand. I don't mind contributing here and there, but I'm not going to continue paying for everything. We've worked hard to get here, and I want us to be able to enjoy our success without feeling like we owe everyone." From there, we set clear boundaries together. She started having conversations with her family about not expecting me to foot the bill for everything. It wasn't easy, and there were some hurt feelings, but over time, her family began to understand that I wasn't the bad guy. They started respecting the fact that we had worked for what we had, and I stopped feeling like I was constantly under pressure. As for me, I kept building my business and watching it grow. I made sure to prioritize our financial future, investing wisely and saving for the future. But I also made sure to protect my peace, refusing to let the guilt-tripping continue. My wife and I found our balance. We kept supporting her family in the ways that made sense to us, but I no longer felt like a financial safety net for them. I learned that it's okay to say no and that no amount of money is worth losing your sense of self or your peace of mind. And that's where we are now, financially secure, emotionally stable, and with a clear understanding of where we stand with family, and that's worth more than any amount of money I could give away. That's it for today's story. If you want to hear more, hit subscribe and leave a like. Your support means a lot.